to Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Geri Simon, a League member and your host. Each week we'll talk about issues that are important to elections. We hope to inspire you to talk about these issues with your friends and neighbors as well. And most importantly, when election time comes around, we hope to help you be ready and willing to go vote. This week we thought you probably had the question as, what is the League of Women Voters? Well, we have a guest today who's going to help us answer that question and talk about the League. She knows an awful lot about the League. She's been a longtime member and has done a history of the League of Women Voters. I'd like to welcome Deb Neary.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, Deborah, why don't you answer that question to start off with? What is the League of Women Voters?
Well, the League of Women Voters, I think it's summed up in two words. We're nonpartisan, which is the most important part of the mission of our work, but we really are in place to help educate voters and to increase the number of people that are participating in the election process by helping to register voters and let them know, what they need to know before going to the polls, like where their polling places are and who the candidates are and what are the issues that are important.
When did the League get started? My understanding is that we called it a mighty political experiment when it started.
And it really was. And, it's so exciting because we're coming up on we're in our 95th year of the League of Women Voters. It was actually came to fruition just as women were getting the vote in 1920. There were so many efforts behind the suffrage movement, and really it is so interesting. Here in Nebraska, the suffrage movement actually started in 1856, and when you think Omaha was formed in 1854, that early Nebraska's territorial legislature was already looking at giving women the vote, and it almost passed in the legislature of 1856. Nebraska women we would have been the first state to pass the suffrage amendment, but unfortunately it didn't until 1920, but the whole suffrage amendment came up quite a few times in Nebraska's history, and then again in 1920 it actually passed became an amendment on a national level in August of 1920, and before Nebraska was able to pass it. But Nebraska then, women went to the vote in September of 1920 to then be able to vote for the right to vote.
Right.
But there was so much energy behind getting, women the vote, and there were national leaders that didn't want that energy to go away. So in 1920, when women got the right to vote, they closed down, all the activity, that was focused on the suffrage amendment, and then started the League of Women Voters. And the purpose at that time was to help women be informed voters, and encourage them to go to the polls. And that's what we've been ever since, an organization that really tries to educate voters on the issues in a nonpartisan way.
Okay. So would you explain that, nonpartisan? Some people are confused, I think, by the League because we say we're nonpartisan, but then we study issues and take positions. So how do you draw the contrast between those two things?
Right. We are made up of members who are, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and we really study issues in a nonpartisan way. Everything we do is made up from individuals from, both parties. Especially, I chaired the voters guide, and I just remember even just forming the questions of what we're going to be asking candidates, how important it was that we had people from both parties there to help make sure that the questions that we're asking are fair. But everything that we do is, we bring all points of view together, we study issues, and then we look at what is of most value to our community, our state, or whatever the issues that we're looking at. And we don't, party politics really don't play a role in what we decide to study or what our positions are.
So do we ever support parties or candidates?
So we don't support parties or candidates ever. I mean, we even when we put together the voters guide, there's so much neutrality to that we just create the questions, ask the questions, and we let the candidates in their own words respond. We don't analyze it or interpret it or summarize it. We use the exact words that the candidates have given us.
Okay. And then you talked about the voter's guide. Talk a little bit about what that is and what that does for people when election time comes around.
So a lot of people know about the voter's guide, which we've been doing for a long time. And we now have Vote 411, which is another topic I hope we can discuss today. But the voter's guide, is always, we start early in the process. We put together questions for each individual office that the electorate will be looking at. We then approach the candidates on all sides and ask them to give us some background information and then answer some questions. What are their positions on these certain issues? We take their answers, we don't edit it, we don't even clean up grammar or misspelling or anything. We put it in a guide and it's distributed. I think we usually do about 40,000 printed guides and we make it available online. But we try to, get people informed about the issues and the candidates in a very neutral way. And I can safely say that I don't know of any other source that really has the type of neutral information that the voter's guide puts out. Every other source that puts out voter information, they all have an issue that they're wanting, to, present. And I would say even the Omaha World Herald, which is a great source for getting information, but even they have their own political interests. And so really, the voter's guide is a way to just, look at the raw information that candidates want to say about issues.
Okay. Let's go back a little bit and talk a little bit about the history of the League in Omaha. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about when the League started in Omaha and where did we go from there?
Sure, and it's, in 1920 in the summer, some of the people watching this might remember the Blackstone Hotel, which is a building that's still there. That was where the first meeting was in the summer of 1920. And I think at that time it cost 50 cents to join the League. And it was a lot of women who, were previously interested in the suffrage movement, but membership grew. And, a lot of people who wanted to study issues and get involved in the community. And it really, in the early days, and somewhat true today, it's like any woman who even wanted to run for office would be involved in the League because it really was a way to learn about issues. But mostly to bring changes in the community is what we became. And as I look at the history in Omaha over the last 95 years, it's just amazing to know all of the things that we have in place today that we take for granted that were because of the hard work of the League. Being on the front end of a lot of these issues, taking the unpopular position, often, but trying to educate the electorate about why certain issues were important.
Well, I know one of our founders of the League, Carrie Chapman-Catt, had said the League should be 5 years ahead of its time in terms of determining public issues and public policy. And what were some of those early issues in the early days of the League in Omaha?
Well, that's a great quote. And I think it's very true that the League really has always been 5 years ahead of the electorate and understanding some of these issues and helping to move them along. As you mentioned her, one of the early people at the League, another name that comes to mind that might be familiar to some people was Amelia Bloomer, who she was actually from Council Bluffs, and the whole Bloomers, were named for her, but she actually spoke to our legislature in the 1850s, early on trying to get the suffrage movement going, but then, was an early member to the League of Women Voters. And some of the issues in the 20s and 30s, they were really, looking at, I think one of the early ones was like merit increases for civil employees, something that we take, for granted today. I know our structure in the early years of, today, our whole, how our city council are elected, and we have heads of different departments who actually have backgrounds in what, the department they're running. Well, we can thank the League of Women Voters because in the early days there was a commission form of government, and that was something that the League was very interested in changing. At that time we had, people running for the commission, and then they would get elected by their other commissioners as to what department they would be running. So they could be running, you know, a department that they had absolutely no background in and no knowledge of, and it wasn't an efficient use of our, you know, resources, and it wasn't a great way of getting business done. And so the League had, in the early years, in the 20s and 30s, a really important role in helping to bring about changes in the way even our local government does business today.
So they really pushed for professional management of departments in the city.
That is correct,
okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And in the 40s, you know, it's interesting as I think back to some of the research I've read about the 40s, and, you know, that's when the Equal Rights Amendment started becoming popular. But the League, and this is a really important issue, or thought about the League, is that, you know, we've never really identified as a women's organization. We've never identified as an organization that's, you know, just advocating for women's rights. And, you know, today, as you know, we have male members and many male members.
Yes.
And, you know, and I think some people get confused that, you know, they think we're a women's rights organization, and we aren't. You know, there might be some, you know, policies or issues that we study, but, you know, an example of that, in World War II, in 1943, they were trying to get the ERA off the ground, and as a matter of fact, we voted against. I mean, we were against the ERA in the 1940s because we believed, you know, the country's at war, there's more important issues, you know, and it really, you know, we didn't, as the League, get involved in the ERA until, I think, late 70s, early 80s.
That's really interesting.
Right, because all along, I mean, there was the understanding that we aren't here to advocate for women's rights per se, not to say that, you know, I mean, eventually we did take on the ERA as an issue as well, but that isn't our primary reason for being here.
So in the 40s in Omaha, what particular issues did the League work on?
You know, garbage collection, which we take for granted today.
Garbage collection.
But yes, I know.
It was a big issue back then?
Well, it didn't exist. I mean,
okay.
You know, and so, you know, we needed a system for picking up garbage. And we needed, you know, over the, you know, the 50s and the 60s, you know, some of these issues, it took more than a decade to actually see some results, because, you know, when you're educating people on issues, you know, sometimes candidates can, you know, derail some of your work, you know, if they're opposed to it. And so, you know, some of the examples of, you know, not only the garbage collection and sanitation, but like child labor laws was really important. Laws for daycares, you know, and daycare legislation that was in place. The public library is one of my favorite, because, you know, I don't know if we'd have a public library, you know, the new nice building that we have on Farnham Street, if it wasn't for the League of Women Voters taking such a huge active role in that. We, you know, they realized, you know, the old library building on Harney Street, I mean, there's so many problems with it. So they started giving tours of the old library and throwing events there and doing a lot to really spotlight the problems with the old library and how much more space was needed. And then they actually took on the fundraising for the new library and had a major role in helping to raise the money for that. And you know, there's just been so many issues like that that weren't accomplished overnight, weren't accomplished in 1 year, but the League members were pretty persistent.
So you're demonstrating the League is not only interested in raising issues, but in taking action on issues as well. And
oh, very much so. And it's really interesting to see, you know, and understand all the things that we have today because of actions that they took. Working together in small groups, you know, to just understand issues, you know.
And how does the League study issues? How do we go about that? I mean, we're an organization, maybe you want to explain how we're on 3 different levels.
Right, and we have the local, the state, and we're all part of a national organization. And so there is different levels of how issues are taken on and studied. Some are, at a national level, but they usually are started in a grassroots sort of way that, the local leagues and the state leagues take on the issues first, and it grows up, and there's a consensus across, the country as to what the position should be. But, we advocate quite a bit. I know in recent years, voter rights has been an issue that the league has been very interested in, and so we do work on, the local and state level wherever those policies are being considered.
So recently in our unicameral, the voter ID came up again, and the league was there to speak against that?
Had a very active role. But before we were there advocating, we spent quite a long time looking at all sides of the issues in a nonpartisan way, with both parties represented. And then, we studied the issue, we presented it to our electorate, they voted and reviewed and then, looked at it again. And it's not a simple process. And I know we've been accused in the past of moving too slowly sometimes to take action, but, when we do take action, it's been a very inclusive process and a very thorough process. And so, then that's when we're out, testifying at hearings and, and advocating for certain issues.
Okay. So getting back to our local league again, then towards more of the 70s, and the 70s was when men could join the league. We really were a women's organization up until 73. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. And it's so great to see so many men that are a part of the league today. Yes, and part of our study groups. I know that we have individuals who attend regular meetings, whether it's the NRD board or the OPPD board or MUD or, and it comes to mind, I know we have a lot of men that are, go to...
They go observe the meetings.
They go observe the meetings and then report back to other league members on, what's being discussed, what are the issues, what are the concerns. And we do that for a lot of different, public hearings that are taking place.
Okay. Why don't you talk a little bit more about voter services? You wanted to get to Vote 411. So talk about what kind of voter services besides that we do, registering to vote, those kinds of things.
Well, it is really exciting to me because I think one of the most interesting things that we do is we are at naturalization ceremony.
What is tell our viewers what that is.
Okay. So when people are becoming citizens for the very first time, we attend those, and we have information on how they can register to vote that day. And so once they become a citizen, they can start, voting right away. And we try to, get them involved in that process. But we do a lot. We're at all the high schools registering. Once someone is of age to vote, we want to make sure that we've got them registered. But we also are out, and that reminds me, on September 22nd, we have National Voter... Is it
Registration
Day?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That was co-founded by the league, yes.
Okay, now I didn't know. So who co-founded that? Who was
the league and some other community voting organizations as well. So I think for about 2 years now we've been doing National Voter Registration Day.
All right, and that's exciting because there will be a lot of organizations out helping to register voters that day. But I know the league really is a lead in that effort, and we're at the community colleges, the different campuses, and UNO, and I know there's a list of about 10 places that we're going to be on September 22nd registering voters, and I hope that people listening to this will go to our Facebook page or our website, and if they are interested in registering, we can make it easy for them. And one thing that most people don't understand is that when we register voters, we have to have more than one party present. That's part of the law. We have to have, either a Republican and Democrat or one of those parties and an independent. We have to have two people there, to make sure that this process is, being carried out in a way that is fair and neutral.
And not partisan then.
And not partisan. But one of the things that's come out, so I was in charge of the voters guide a few years ago, and oh my gosh, I mean, it's like a full-time.
It's a huge project,
It
isn't
is huge. I mean, because half of what you're doing is just chasing down candidates to respond to the questions, and anyways, so I realized, that it was like a full-time job, and so I was lucky enough that at that same time, National was coming out with a software system called Vote 411 that we are able to now incorporate. And it's so much easier for the candidates now and everybody. The candidates don't have to worry about mailing things in or things getting lost in the mail, and it's all online. And we just email the candidates our questions. They upload their own answers. We don't even have to touch it. And then we can use that information then to send to a printer to print our voter's guide, but it's so accessible, and I know before elections now the library, makes sure that they have certain computers available, so if people want to go to Vote 411, they can find their polling place. Now we have online registration to vote, and so
talk about that a little bit. That's just starting.
That is just starting. This is the first year, and that is going to be a part of Vote 411 too, so it's a one-stop shop where people can register and also get information, all that they need to know to go to the polls.
That's great.
It is great. It really is. But getting the vote out. The other thing that we have been involved in is, also vulnerable populations that aren't able to get out. Before we had online registration, we have spent a lot of time going to, either senior living areas or, areas where people might have trouble to get out to register, and tried to help those populations too.
Okay. And then we assist people with knowing where they're to vote and that they don't have to vote in person on election day.
That is correct, yes. Exactly.
Okay. There's another program that the League has been doing that you might talk a little bit about, and that is for young women. It's something that we've done every 2 years called Running and Winning. Could you tell a little bit about that?
I'd love to.
Idea?
I wish it were for people my age because it's so cool. So it is a program for high school students, for young women, and every year we select a number of high schools, and then those high schools select the students that they think will really benefit from this opportunity. And I think we have, more than 60 young women that participate every time we offer it. And it gives these women, they spend a whole day at UNO. I think it's still held there. And they get to meet political candidates or people that are currently holding office or have held office in the past, and they get to really get to know these people on a personal level.
And they're all women, right?
And it's all women, right? So, all of these role models. And then they get to learn about what they need to do to develop or run a campaign if they were going to. They come up, if they were going to run for something, they come up with a campaign slogan and a whole, what are the steps they're going to do. And they have league members and, people who have held public office help these young ladies kind of fine-tune their ideas or, see themselves in this role down the road. So we're planting seeds, and it is an exciting day, because we start with these, bold, smart women, and they leave feeling pretty courageous about the idea of running for an office.
That's really great. And they actually have to do a campaign slogan and create a campaign on the spot,
exactly,
don't they?
They do. And they are also creative, and it's such a worthwhile day.
That's really, really great. So let's see, what else in terms of what the League's working on? The League has, do you want to talk a little bit about our general meetings and the program that we have, and that anyone who's not a League member can come to those, right? To the meetings?
You bet, yes. And there's all sorts of different meetings every month, you know, whether it's the state league that's inviting us or the local league that's inviting us, but there's so many opportunities to just hear people talking about issues, experts on the issue, and fellow league members. And, you know, it's a way to kind of formulate your own thoughts. You know, if there is an issue that someone, you know, has read about in the paper and doesn't understand very well, but just wants to come here, I mean, they're certainly welcome to come. They don't have to be a league member. But and there's a great camaraderie in the room, you know, because we all seem to be so respectful of each other's opinions, and there are so many opinions, and, you know, that's what's so exciting about it. It's like you're not just hearing one perspective, but you're really thinking about all the ramifications of whatever the topic is that we're discussing.
Wonderful. Well, the league's been going for about 95 years, and I think we're looking forward to many more years of the League of Women Voters, especially in Omaha. Thank you so much. We're out of time for today, but Deborah, it's been a pleasure to have you talk about the League of Women Voters, and we are at an end of our program. So for the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha, I'm Geri Simon, reminding you to inform yourself about the issues, talk to friends and families and neighbors about those issues, and when election time rolls around, go vote Omaha.